All right, everybody, welcome to week 8. So that's where we're at now. Last week we talked about GraphQL, we talked about IDLs as well, and talked about interfaces. That was kind of the main presentation point. This week we're going to talk about authentication. And for our intro, there's a few points that I'm going to touch upon before we do that, but that's the main course. And at the very end, last week we tried for the first time a new way to do breakout sessions. This time we're going to continue with that format, and we're going to be looking at some auth jargon and trying to make sense of that. So as always, we're going to have a space for project pitches. So if you or your team are looking for additional members, now is the time to kind of get an opportunity to do that. And so you can pitch people who are looking to join teams and hop aboard. So that will happen after the objective. So if you want to do that now, think about, get ready to do that. Okay, so our objectives, these are a refresher. I've tweaked the language a little bit just to make it more concise, but the objectives for the summer are twofold. The first is to essentially help you get noticed. And that's by improving your traditional resume by having projects that kind of stand out, as well as your public resume by being useful and interesting on the internet. And that will help you get noticed and potentially be in front of people who can get you jobs. So the other thing is to improve your job skills. These are some things that we've talked about, but this week in particular, we're going to focus on authentication. Nearly every single app that's out there has some form of authentication if it's dealing with user data. And so that is what we'll talk about. So at this point, does anybody want to pitch their project? If they're looking for more collaborators at this time, just ping the chat. If not, we will move on. And you can also do this later in right before we go to demos or right after demos as well, but there won't be as many people there necessarily. So I don't think there is anybody, so we will skip that for today. All right, so one thing that I wanna kind of go over is our SOS interview prep. And so I just wanna make sure I'm recording. Yeah, I'm recording. Okay, and so last week we started with the first interview prep meetup, and we had 17 people who jumped aboard, which is pretty cool. 11 people participated, broke up into 2 small groups. We simulated an interview. And it was kind of a safe environment. So if you don't know something in this environment, it's totally okay to be like, hey, again, this is interview, but I know I don't know this, so I'm gonna like break the simulation, and that's okay. But I want to give a big shout out to Pedro for organizing, and a big shout out to a couple of our mentors, John and Kevin, for facilitating the small groups. So that was really great to see. We hope to see more of you there. They're Tuesdays at 5 p.m. at PDT. And so if you're interested, there is an interview prep channel on Discord where you can find more information. In the future, we'll try to record them. We know it's kind of difficult for people where that time zone's not ideal, but that will try to continue to happen. They can be a little bit scary to do these, but by doing this, you're going to grow really fast and you're going to really kind of learn all the bunch of tricks of the trade. We've got, a handful of people who've been on the other side, who have administered interviews, who have passed interviews. And so getting that information is quite useful. All right, demo list again. We've got, this is just a list of people who have demoed. And so this is where we were at last week. After the last week, it has gone up. And so boom, boom. Yep. Thank you everybody who has demoed. And I added some X's for people who have done demos more than once. Some I might not have gotten that right. Some people might have done more than 2 or more than 3. But that's from just from memory. So thank you everybody for demoing, and that's big congratulations are in order, because that's the easiest way to ship something is to demo something, and that way people can see what you're working on. So the list grows, which is great. One other thing I want to touch upon is values, and the reason why I want to talk about values is because if we follow a certain set of values with SOS and have a certain way of just going about our business, we're actually going to generate a lot of value, and we're going to get a lot more value from this program. And so this is why I want to talk about it. Last Friday, I talked about this in my email, but now I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. So the first value is people first, software second. And I remember reading this article from last year. It was titled How to Write Good Software. And one of the things, it was actually a really good post. And one of the things they talked about was the value of working on a team is not really necessarily the code that's produced, but the knowledge accumulated by the people who produced it. And there's this theme in software again and again and again, where it's really the people and not necessarily the code that really matter. The code definitely does matter, but people matter a little bit more. One other thing that I've been asked by people a bunch is just, how do I get a better network? How do I, have a a community or have a group of people that will essentially support me as I'm looking for jobs and so on. And one of the answers for that is to give value first before kind of thinking about value. So when you give value, you kind of make the community richer. And when you make the community richer, the network kind of grows around you and is stronger, and they want to be able to help the helper. So with the values, one of them is to give. Another one is to build in public. That creates a virtuous cycle of feedback. Last one is ship daily. That is kind of self-explanatory. And a couple other things that we wanted people to do were to think about having a growth mindset as well as taking initiative. But they're kind of prerequisites for building in public anyways. You need to have, building in public requires you to be a little bit open to failure. And growth mindset is all about, well, if I mess up, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's an opportunity to grow. And that's something that we need to really adopt to have that build in public kind of philosophy. So the main reason why we're going over this is, if you follow these values, you get more value out of SOS. And that's just that's kind of the main crux of why I'm talking about this. All right, so with that, we're going to go to authentication. I'm going to stop my screen share and I will turn it over to Nick, who will take it over from here. So let me stop this and then change the setting. Boom.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Hide. Okay, can you all, oh shoot. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so as Phil said, we wanted to talk a little bit about authentication and also a tiny bit about authorization and what these concepts are and how they apply to software security in general. So yeah, let's just dive in. What is authentication? Authentication, put simply, is basically the act of verifying someone is who they claim to be. And so it's a process concerned with determining who you are. Like, who are you? There are many ways to answer this question, obviously. There's kind of like your name, your email address, your phone number, maybe a credit card, a passport number, a driver's license. But in, I don't know, software, things tend to get a bit abstract and hard to reason about. So the way I tend to describe authentication when people ask about it, or the way I sometimes think about it myself, is using the analogy of a hotel. And in a hotel, like, why use this analogy? Basically because it's like, we all have the experience of having gone to a hotel and it's physical, and it's sometimes easier to reason about physical things more than software. And so whenever you go to a hotel, you typically first go to the front desk and you check in to the hotel. And you tend to tell the clerk that, like, hey, I'm a guest, I have a reservation here. And they could take your word for it, and they could just hand you a key and let you take a room. But more often than not, they'll tend to ask for some sort of identification and verification that you are who you claim to be. And that identification can be a number of things. Like, if you're abroad, it tend to be a passport. It can also be a credit card or a reservation number. But the main idea is that you hand over some sort of credential, which the clerk can verify. And they'll be able to use that credential that you give them to look up your reservation in the hotel system and confirm that you are actually a guest there. And so one thing to note, like, about this process is that authentication can only be secure if that credential is unique and verifiable and non-reproducible. So to take, like, an example, say I had a copy of Phil's ID card, but say, like, with my face on it. If Phil had a hotel reservation, I, in theory, might be able to get to that hotel before him and claim his reservation as him. And if the clerk couldn't tell the difference, and or couldn't tell that my ID was fake, like, there's nothing to stop me from potentially doing that. So the less copyable that your credentials are, the better they tend to be, and the more secure they tend to be. And moving on, one hiccup that many people fall for is this mix-up between authentication and authorization. And it makes sense why people mix up these terms, because they have the same prefix, they have the same suffix, and our minds tend not to look at every individual letter when we're reading. We tend to just kind of glance over things, as well as these concepts are rather related, but actually quite different. And so the question is, what is authorization then? And authorization is not really concerned about who you are. It's very concerned about what you are allowed to do. And so it's mainly the act of verifying that someone can perform some certain action. And to carry on with the hotel analogy, that typically takes place with hotels use authorization all the time using door keys. And when you check into the front desk, after authenticating and you kind of verify who you are, the clerk will give you a door key, which will authorize you to open a single door in the hotel or access a single room in the hotel. And you, by kind of definition, still remain unauthorized to open every door in the hotel, but you do have access to open one. And that's sort of, I don't know, in general sense, what authorization is. But one thing to note is that it's only as secure as the key, basically. So you have to keep your key well protected and make sure it can't be faked. Just like you need to make sure the credentials can't be faked on the authentication side. And like, why do you need to keep the key protected? Basically, the key doesn't know anything about the hand that wields it. So if someone were to steal your door key, they could easily get access to your room. And additionally, like, there tends to be people in every system, whether it's an app or a hotel or anything, that tend to need or require more permissions than others. And in a hotel, this tends to be like managers or cleaners who have keys which allow them to open, like any or every door in the hotel, because they need to get into those rooms to do their job. And so you can imagine, like, if a manager lost their hotel key or someone malicious maybe stole it, that person would be able to use the key to get into every door. And so that could be quite an issue. And if the key could be faked, then that's also quite an issue as well. As this picture kind of shows, I assume this person is faking a hotel door key, but I just kind of found this picture online, so I don't really know what's happening here. But the main thing to keep in mind is he's wearing the shirt that says it's fun to use learning for evil. And it's important to keep in mind that there are definitely people out there that want to use their learning for evil and for malicious means. And they can be quite an issue when it comes to security. And so let's break down the analogy here, and let's bring it back to software. So the hotel in this example is our app. It's the structure. It's the thing that kind of, we're building what we're doing. The front desk is like the sign-in flow. It's where we send our users, or our anonymous users that we don't know who they are. It's where we send them to go the first time they enter the app. The door key is like an access token or a session token. And the rooms are basically like API endpoints. They're what your users, where they need to go in order to get data out of your app, as well as where they go to put data into your app. And managers tend to be like admins in a typical application. And hackers are hackers. There's always hackers trying to break into every system. And so I want to focus in on one aspect of this analogy in particular, and that's the access and session tokens, because these tend to be more the most complicated or complex thing that's hardest to understand. And so to explore this concept, I'd like to propose we design a to-do app. And so this is the to-do app. It's pretty basic. There's some users on the left-hand side. There's a backend server in the middle, and then we have a users table and a to-do table. So pretty simple setup. And let's imagine one of our users, or we send all of our users to this login endpoint. And each user passes along a username or an email and a password, let's say, to this login endpoint. And what we do from that endpoint is we'll look into our users table, see if there is an existing user with that email. compare the password to one that's stored. And I should point out, like, if you're accepting passwords, definitely hash them and probably use like a non-deterministic hashing algorithm like bcrypt. But this talk isn't really about like managing passwords. So that's about all I'm going to say for the rest of this talk. But like password management is kind of a whole rabbit hole in itself. But if you take away one thing, just take away that you should hash your passwords, hash passwords that users give you. But carrying on, let's assume that the credentials are valid. The password matches the hashed version that we have in our data store. So we grab the user out of the table, and we put that user into a session object, and we return the session ID to the client, the front-end client. And the session is kept in memory on our server. And so in subsequent requests, say to fetch to-dos, the clients can pass along the session ID associated with the client. The backend server can look up, is there an existing session with this ID, and which user is associated with that session. And once we grab the session, or we find it, we are able to pull the user out of it. We can grab the user ID, and we can grab all the to-dos from the to-dos table with that user ID, and then return them to the user. And at this point, might be expecting me to say like there's something insecure about this flow, but this really works. This is like a really common standard pattern that's implemented in many, many, many applications. But despite the fact it works, it's not without its pain points. And so the biggest pain point that tends to pop up with this type of setup is that it's stateful. And particularly those session objects, you have to manage them. And at scale, when you have like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of users, that single backend server isn't going to be able to serve all of your users. And so you end up needing to add a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, many servers. And it can create an issue if, say, your user logs in and that request goes to server 1, a session gets created on server 1, and they get their session ID back, and then they make a request to fetch all their to-dos, and that request instead goes to server 4, and server 4 doesn't have session like that particular session. And so the way to solve this ends up, you tend to replicate sessions across servers, but that only scales so far because you can't replicate every session across every server for relatively obvious reasons. And so you end up solving that problem by session pinning. And so you inspect the incoming request and route it to a particular kind of group of servers that are known to hold the session objects in particular. And then to make solve fast, we tend to use hashes and things like Redis, which can be unreliable on their own terms. And so it becomes a bit of a pain to manage sessions, and because they're stateful. And so more recently, we've kind of begun to ask this question of like, can we make this stateless and get rid of this session idea? And so let's try to do that. So let's imagine we got rid of the sessions. Let's try to like simplify this whole application and make it stateless. So let's imagine the user makes a login request. Same thing as before. They pass along their email and password. We verify the credentials. We fetch the user from the user table. They have user ID 4. We return, this time, instead of putting the user into a session and returning the session ID, let's just return the whole user object. And so the user on the client, there's this user object there. It says user ID 4, email, foobar. And then on subsequent requests, the user will just pass along. They'll say like, hey, I'm user 4. Give me all my to-dos because I need to check stuff off. And so our backend can be like, okay, user 4, let's fetch all the to-dos for user 4, return the to-dos. Like, this works. What's wrong with this? And the issue is we're forgetting about one very important thing. And that is we're forgetting about this guy. And this guy still exists. So this guy, as soon as he figures out that all he has to do is change the user ID on the end of this request, he'll spam the heck out of this endpoint with all sorts of different user IDs, and he'll try to find, he'll try to grab everyone's data and maybe delete to-dos or wreak havoc on everyone else in the system. And so this isn't quite secure because anyone can essentially forge a user ID. And so the problem here is that we need a secure way to authenticate users on every request, not just the login request. But it'd be impractical to ask users, say, for their email and password on every request, every time they wanted to list their to-dos or update a to-do or check one off. Like, it's just kind of terrible UX. Everyone would delete the app. And so if we take a step back and ask, like, why were sessions secure to begin with? The main reason why they were secure, or considered more secure than user IDs, is that they gave us a layer of indirection between, to the users. And with the session, we got this session ID that was less public than the user ID. And the reason I say less public is that user IDs tend to, like, we pass them around to all sorts of different systems on our backend. And I mean, your employees could be, like, if you have a bug, employees pass around user IDs all the time. It's like, this user had this problem, this user had this problem. They go into, like, customer management systems. They go all over the place. So you tend to need to assume that your user IDs are public, where the session ID only exists in that connection between, like, that server and that client. And you try to make sure, and which is over a secure HTTPS connection. You try to make sure that session ID doesn't leave that sort of sphere of existence. And the other thing that made them secure is that they were temporary. And so user IDs, because they get passed around everywhere, many different systems tend to have dependencies on user IDs. And updating user ID can be, like, a huge pain, if not like impossible in your system without having all sorts of weird integrations. Where to get rid of a session ID, like, if we can imagine the session ID got leaked or stolen somehow, the only thing we would have to do to change it is we could pull the user object out of that session, move them into a new session, and delete the old one. And, like, that's easy peasy, problem solved. Assuming there's not some more structural reason why the session ID got, like, you should definitely go fix that if that's the case. But once that's fixed, it's quite easy to update the session ID just by creating a new one, which is not the case with users. And so tokens come into the picture to try to offer those benefits without the downsides of having state. And so enter tokens stage right. So the idea behind tokens is that instead of doing this, where we create a session with our user and return the session ID, we should instead do this. We'll put the user data onto a token and give the client that token. And then on subsequent requests, the client can return the token, and our backend can verify it and say whether or not the user should be allowed to continue with the request. Okay, so what is this token? Like, how does this work? What is this strange magic that allows us to actually do this? And the most common way to do this, is, like, by far the most common way nowadays, is what's called a JSON web token. The acronym is JWT. We pronounce it JOT. I don't quite know why, but it's pronounced JOT. And so I want to dive into JOTs a little bit. And as implied by the name, JSON Web Token, it's just JSON. So there's nothing too magic about it. It's basically just JSON. But the first asterisk here is that this JSON typically does not look like JSON because we tend to base64 encode these tokens to make them easier to pass around. And I mean, it just so happens tends to be easier to pass around a string between all sorts of different like servers and clients than it is to pass around JSON data. So we tend to base64 these values. And the other thing to note is that they have these, all of them that you see will have these two periods here. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but I'm trying to circle these two periods at the end of the red string and at the end of the purple string. And the reason they have these periods is that each JOT or each JSON web token has 3 parts to it. And so let's explore these parts. What are these different parts? The first part is the header. Tends to be rather small, rather simple. The The second field there, type, is just saying that this is a JSON web token. The algorithm is, I'll get back to the algorithm in a moment. The body of the token is like the JSON body. It's where you can put all the claims about the user. So that first claim there, SUB, that stands for subject. And so you can imagine that like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that number is a user ID, equivalent to what we were referring to as user 4 here. So the subject to the token is user 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. The name, the user's name is tester McTesty. That's their email. The token was issued at that particular timestamp. And you can additionally put other kind of custom claims there as well. Any kind of claim you want. A really common one is expiration. And so you can set a date beyond which the token will be considered expired and shouldn't be accepted as valid anymore. And that's quite important. But you might be asking, like, well, anyone can sort of create this request body and like forge this. So why is this any like more secure than anything else? And the answer is this last part here, which is a signature. And the signature is basically a cryptographic hash function where we take the first two parts, the header and the body, and we hash them together with a secret key here called my super secret. And what we get out of that function is a unique signature that only possessors of this key will be able to create. So if you keep that key super secret, you can be reasonably sure that no one will be able to forge your signature onto this token. And the reason that's valuable is that what this token really is it's some list of claims, some JSON object that we've given our signature to as a to-do app, let's say. And we can always check our signature and like be able to verify that it's ours. And because we've kept our super secret key secret, no one is able to forge our signature unless they're able to guess our secret key, which hopefully they're not able to do. Like, you shouldn't use my super secret as the value of your secret key. And so that's what these tokens are. And what that allows us to do is if someone were to present this token to us in the request, we can validate the signature. And then because the signature is valid, we know that we can securely accept the claims of this token, of this document. And we can say, oh, you must be user ID 4 because at some prior point in time, I said you were user ID 4. And if the signature is invalid or it doesn't look like it's ours, we can reject this request and say, like, I didn't sign this. I didn't say you use user ID 4. It seems like you're trying to forge my signature here. And so that's how these tokens work. And that's actually the end of this talk. But this is also barely just scratching the surface of authentication. And there's a lot more to kind of dive into. Each of these acronyms and words listed here is kind of its own rabbit hole unto its own. So there's things like single sign-on, SSO, and OIDC, which is kind of related to SSO, SAML implementation of that. So like OAuth 2, one-time passwords is WebAuthn, which is a new standard that's kind of coming up. Password hashing, which kind of briefly mentioned earlier. There's a lot of more growing regulation around authentication, and multi-factor authentication, of course, as well as a number of other topics to kind of dive into. And so because this tends to be quite a complex and difficult thing to do correctly, the general recommendation that everyone will give you is you should use a pre-built solution, some code that like some other team has already built. And there's many, many, many libraries that you can use to implement authentication into your apps. And so just like enumerating some of them, on the open source side, there's Passport.js, there's Express Sessions, Django Auth, Keycloak, many others that I couldn't quite remember when I was coming up with this slide. And on the provider side, kind of closed sourced options, there's Firebase Auth, Auth0, AWS Cognito, Fusion Auth, and the last one there is Feather. And Feather is kind of special to to me and Phil because we have built it over the last, or are building it. And it's a project that we kind of started hacking away on a couple months ago because we had run into this frustration of building authentication numerous times and building apps, and we'd kind of like rolled our own authentication solution at one point in a very hacky way, and we didn't feel great about it, so we pulled that out, and then we implemented Auth0, and that didn't go so well for a number of reasons, and the more we kept like shopping around for trying to find like this authentication library we were looking for, we couldn't quite find it, and so we decided to try to build it ourselves. And so if you like, I could try to demo it if the guys are with us today. But yeah, is everyone, do we have time? What time is it?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, it's 7:30. I don't know if there's a question. Important stuff. Spring security. Yeah. I don't think I listed any particular Java libraries here. Farron, I don't know what you used for the Tattoo application, but I'm sure there's some libraries for Spring to be able to import authentication. And yeah, okay. So let me see if I can demo Feather real fast to show kind of how we were trying to make this simpler. And so here, you can also see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. So here I've just run create React app, and I've made some slight modifications. So we just have this application that's running, and we have some routes set up. And on our base route, we are displaying a sign-in component. And on this verify route, we have this other component, and on this profile route, we have this profile component. And so the idea here, what we're looking at here on this side is the sign-in component, and we can look at it here, and we can see that, okay, there's nothing here. And so the challenge here, let's try to create an authentication flow, a sign-in flow for our app, and see how simply we can do this. And so the way you would do this with Feather is you would import this authentication form from React. We can add this authentication form to our app. Let's see what happens. Boom, we have this sign-in form. And it comes kind of fully built out with the email password. You can create an account, password, email, confirm password. There's a forgot password flow. And you might be noticing, if I move this Zoom box, there are these warnings here. And so they're telling us that we didn't provide a Feather client, which is necessary in order to kind of make requests and authenticate our users. And as well as we didn't provide a redirect URL for this forgot password flow. Because the way this forgot password flow works is you enter your email, Feather will send the user an email with a link, and then when the user clicks the link, that gets redirected back to your app with a verification code. And so let's try to solve that, or these warnings. And so to solve that, we need a Feather client, first of all. And so let's create a Feather client back in our app here. So I'm going to import Feather from Feather. And I'm going to create a Feather client. And I just need, oh no. Oh, I have it here. I just need an API key. I couldn't see that page because of Zoom, but I lost it. Okay, so I have a Feather client. And now the challenge is I need to, because I've declared this kind of at this scope up here, I need to pass this value down through the React component tree to our sign-in flow. And the typical pattern that React uses for this type of challenge is a context wrapper. And so Feather comes with a Feather context wrapper, which we can implement here, Feather context provider, and we just pass it a value. Let's wrap our application with this. And what this does is any sort of component below this or inside this provider is able to just specify that they want to use Feather. And then they can access it from their params. And so there we've passed this Feather client that was initialized here. We've provided it to the context provider, and then sort of further down in the component tree, we've just asked for it here, and we're able to provide it to the authentication form. And so that's how we do that. And then we just need a redirect URL. So let's add a redirect URL as localhost. I think we're running on 3000, and I'll specify it as verify, which was this path here. I'll come back to these components in a moment. And so there, we got rid of the warnings. Let's see if we can create some counts. So gonna 1, 2, 3, 4, just a super secure password. I'm gonna press continue. And it's just for demo purposes, we're showing that the form that comes kind of pre-built with Feather already has all these form validation functions. So if the user provides an invalid email, we can sort of easily handle that. And if the confirmed password doesn't match, we can inform the user about that. And so once they enter in their super secure 1, 2, 3, 4 password, we can continue. Oh, the current user is already authenticated. Oh, sorry, let me create a new tab here. I should have reset my demo. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we'll try to sign in. You can see nothing happened, but believe it or not, the user is actually now signed in. But what we haven't done is we haven't specified a way to handle this sign-in. So after we got the user, we didn't really do anything with it. And that's, we just have this use effect function here. And all I'm going to do is say on state change, we get this session and user object. And I'm just going to say if the user is not nil, then push to profile. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just going to push to the user profile component. And I think I've done something incorrect here. Sorry, this is the issue with live demos. What is it complaining about? Why doesn't it like me?
Yeah, you were missing a semicolon, I mean a curly bracket. Yeah, get rid of that one. Go down. Get rid of that one. Get rid of the right paren, and then put it down. The next one, I think. Yeah.
I think I needed one here though, too, don't I?
You might. Oh yeah. You need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should be solving the curly bracket problem.
There we go.
Okay, so if we try to, let's try to log in again and see what happens with this. If if user is non-null, then we'll push to the profile route. I believe this was our account before. So if we sign in, okay, we've pushed to the user profile account. And just to show what this is doing, this is a super simple React component. It's basically reusing this with Feather context consumer here. And so we were able to get Feather in our params, and then we just ask Feather who's the current user. We assign that to some state variable within the user profile component. And then we stringify the user object. And so that's a user profile. I'm sure we could create a more pretty user profile page.
Nick, can you actually change it to show the session?
Yeah. So instead of requesting current user, we could request the current session.
Yeah, instead of as a user, but That's
Yeah,
fine.
this will
A
work.
little bit hacky, but it works.
So
And
this is
now,
what the session looks like.
yeah. And can you point out what the token is?
Yeah, the session token is basically the door key we were talking about. So if you're just running a single page React app, just a front end, this doesn't provide a whole lot of value to your application. But if you have a back end, what you can do is append this token to all your requests to your back end, and then we have a client, or sorry, a server SDK that allows you to validate that token. And yeah, this is a JOT like the one we were just describing. Actually, I'm kind of highlighting the refresh token as well there. The session token ends there. Yeah, and this holds some claims about the current session, kind of like what its ID is, when it started, when this token is invalid, who the user of the session is, and yeah, it's signed by Feather. So when you use the Feather SDK to verify it, you can kind of securely authenticate your users as they make requests to your backend service.
Yeah. So
And
Nick, you got a couple
that's the
questions
intent.
in chat, and I think you kind of answered them, but I think you can answer them explicitly. So one of them is how would this be connected to an API? And the second one was, so every HTTP request a user makes, the same token, but the backend checks to make sure it's valid.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, the backend needs to actually validate the token to securely authenticate the user who's making the request.
Yep. And so the idea that token that you're seeing is a really, really important part of it ties everything together. And so essentially what Feather is doing is it's kind of generating that token for you. And then essentially, yeah, both of you, Samson and Ashek, you guys are correct. Then you would attach that token and all your subsequent requests to your backend, and then your backend now has the ability to check and verify if these are indeed valid tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, then you're good to go. Then whoever's making this request is indeed they are authenticated, and they have and then you can check the claims to see if they have the access to do the operation that they want to perform.
Yeah, that's basically it. So I guess cool, but I want to show something even a little more, slightly more challenging. So let's see if this works. So we have our sign-in form here. And at the moment, Feather supports both email and password-based authentication factors, as well as a email verification factor. And this is what we tend to refer to as like passwordless sign-in. And so all you have to do to get the passwordless sign-in form is specify email verification as the authentication factor. And yeah, this form, it doesn't have a forgot password flow because there's no password. And there isn't a create user account. Maybe there should be, but at the moment it's just kind of, you enter your email, you'll get a link, you click the link, and then you can sign in. And so let's try to test this. Let's see how this goes. So I'm gonna enter my email. It's gonna tell me to check my inbox for email from Feather. And if we refresh a bunch of times, we'll see that we have an email here. We have a link. You can see this first part of the link is the redirect URL that we specified. Oh, I cannot highlight it. But yeah, localhost 3000 verify. And then Feather's kind of appended a verification code onto that. And I'm going to copy this link because I'm running this demo in an incognito mode. If I was just running in the regular browser, I could click this and it would open and everything would work. But because of the way incognito tabs tend to work, I'm going to need to paste this here. And click enter. And what it's going to do is it's going to verify that code, and then the user is going to be authenticated, and we're going to get pushed to the user profile field. And just to show what's happening on that verification page, it too is pretty simple. We're using, again, the context consumer here with Feather, and then we're just telling Feather to confirm the codes or the sign-in link from like the browser's current URL. If there's an error, we'll present the error. But if not, when this completes, the the authentication state is going to be updated with the user, and enter app is going to push the user profile as well.
Right. And so, yeah, the kind of the big thing is like just with authentication, almost every flow is going to have a very, anything that you build is going to have a very similar kind of concept. You authenticate, the authentication is going to get you a token of some sort or a session. And then now you use the session for wherever you need to do. And this is just kind of a quick way to see kind of like just what that token really looks like. We've got a question that says Feather isn't specific to React. This is just a React component example. And, or it's a question. And the answer is yes, that's Feather is not specific to React. We just have basically built a library to get up and running in React very quickly. So that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, it could be, definitely. Be connected to AWS. Currently we have server-side libraries for Go and Node. They're not as clean of interfaces as we kind of envision them being. Like long-term, or actually relatively soon, we want to write like middleware components that you can plug in, say like your Express server or Golang server, that can kind of automatically check the incoming session token and either admit or reject the incoming request without you having to like write a whole bunch of code. You just have to set up the middleware. And that's on the server side. And on the client side, we definitely envision kind of building out more front-end libraries for kind of iOS, React Native, Android, etc.
Alrighty.
This mostly are all created in JavaScript. The backend services that do all the authentication, they're written in Go. And then the libraries that this demo is using are the front-end libraries, and those, in order to run in the browser, they're written in JavaScript. Yeah.
Sweet. Alrighty. One thing that we can do is we can also like do some questions right before we do the breakout sessions. A lot of things people might have a lot of questions about just authentication in general, and we'll do that kind of after demos. But let's go to demos real quick, and then we'll bounce back and do some more in authentication. Just like I know there's a lot of concepts and a lot of stuff in authentication. There's probably a lot of questions, and so we can do that in a little bit. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen again, and if anybody so that's this one. Oopsies, I gotta skip a bunch of slides because I put a bunch of them in here. Cool. And then so that wraps up kind of the quick like overview to authentication. And then just going to cover some action items that want people to kind of remember. Again, moving forward, we want to continue to ship daily. So that's one of the things, one of the values that we're hoping to adopt and kind of have a mindset shipping daily. Try to make the demo list by the end of July. That's kind of everybody's goal. If you can do that, then you're at least have one project that you can potentially put on your resume. That's a big part of it. For our team leads, we have a bunch of team leads here and who are either going to be watching this video or here right now. So make sure that with your teams, one thing that I want to kind of recommend everybody do is to carve out a stable recurring weekly time block so that people can expect, hey, we're going to meet every week on Tuesdays at like whatever time. That's just going to be a consistent 30-minute, maybe 1 hour, whatever. You can cancel it. There's nothing to talk about if you guys are up to date. But if not, there's at least that one fallback. The other thing for teams, I want you to start thinking about how to parallelize the work that your team needs to do. That's a huge part of just kind of the confusion. People are not entirely sure like what to work on, and parallelizing that work is really important. Keep in contact with your mentors. And then finally, we created a team leads channel in Discord. So if you're not already active on that and just poking around, do take a look and ask questions when you're stuck or if you're trying to get pointers or ideas from other team leads. So that's a quick thing over there. These are some more. I was actually going to skip through these slides. I think I mentioned everything I wanted to mention about groups just earlier. And so now we'll move into demos. So again, this is my favorite part of each meeting, and it's an opportunity for anybody to share anything. So we're going to see if anybody has any demos for this week. All right. We've got a couple of demos. Okay, cool. So let's see. We've got Samsung and Van, I think, and so we will go Samsung then Van. Yeah, I love this part because I get to clap. That's correct. Here, let me stop sharing my screen, and now whoever is up can go. I think that's Samsung.
All right. All right, so I'll share my screen. Okay, yeah, so my demo is just updates to the project tracker that I demoed a while ago. So we made some good progress. And then Rishav is also here, who joined my group and has done some work.
Hey.
If he wants to say hi.
Hi.
Mr. Shab. All right. Yeah, okay, yeah. So we're just gonna be walking through so stuff we built. So when we built it the first time I demoed, which was like the first week that I was here. So I mean that's just login. So that uses like AWS Cognito. Like the UI has changed a little bit, but the basics are the same, right? So you have a project, and within the project you can make an update. So yeah, I can make an update. I can add pictures. Yeah, I don't know what I have on here. Let's see. Let's do I have a picture to test with? Go with this. It's not too big. Yeah, it's 54 kilobytes. It's actually a tiny file. All right. So yeah, so you can add that and then, I don't know, hello, SOS, and post it. And that makes it a private update. And that was kind of what I had before, was just you have your projects in your account and you can make updates and they stay here, right? And since then, the big thing that I've added is making things public. So if you hit make public, so that'll make it public, which has existed. Like that feature was there, but it didn't do anything before. But now, since this is a public project, I can click this link and this is a public link, right? So this is just the same project and all the public updates are here. And if I make this private and I go back here, oops, then it's not going to show up, right? And this, you don't have to be signed in to view this page. Like I can go like incognito and you know, this page still shows up, right? So this is just a public page. Yeah, and then, so yeah, images don't work yet. We're working on that. But yeah, so that's kind of the groundwork for that. And just lots of UI stuff. And then the other thing is you can also have the posting to Twitter directly now. So I do posting to Twitter, and then I make this a public post, and then hit create update and post to Twitter. Create it, and then it will. Whoops, that's not supposed to happen. All right, I guess that'll have to be fixed. But if that did not happen, this would redirect to Twitter and bring your like your post, which comes here. Wait, wow, I don't know why that is. All right, there's a few bugs here, but it would bring your content and then a link to the public post to Twitter, and then you can just hit post. And I did that earlier with this post on my demo account or on a demo project, right? So it's just the first part of it, and since it's longer, you know, it cuts it off and then puts a link here. And this is kind of the use case, right? So the idea of this project was that it would replace kind of like even like my Twitter's not a bad example, right? I have like all these just like random posts that's just like little milestones and interesting notes. And the kind of devloggy stuff that's interesting, probably mostly for me to keep track of, just as like a marker, and not necessarily for everyone else to see, but you know, just to have it there and have it option and have it be like easily stored and accessible. And what I like showed the first week was like I had this like markdown file before was how I took notes, and I, you know, like some people use Notion and stuff, but the idea here is just yeah, you have this kind of like centralized thing, and then it puts it publicly so that you can just link it on Twitter whenever you want to and post it publicly. And yeah, and then the whole project is here too, right? So you could even have like your company's like dev updates or something, right? And have kind of like a microblog here. And yeah, so that's a core functionality now, is the private things work, the public pages work. And then we're hoping to launch, we're hoping to like have like a thing that's ready to ship, like a V1, because right now it's, I mean, it says V0, it's live, but it's very buggy and there's some stuff missing. So our goal is by next Wednesday, by July 8th or not next Wednesday, but next Wednesday to like put that out there and have it be like ready for people to use. And that'll be V1. And then V2 is like rebuilding the whole thing in like a different, using like serverless instead of AWS Amplify, which like abstracts a lot of stuff away. But yeah, so hopefully we will demo in 2 weeks time with a complete thing.
Awesome.
Hold me accountable to that.
That's awesome. Super excited to see the progress, and it's cool to see some collaboration as well going on between. I remember you were working on this project solo the first time you showed it, and so it's kind of cool to see like other people are helping out as well and getting a little crew.
Yeah.
Sweet. All righty. Well, thank you, Samson. Last week you demoed something completely different, and so this week it's kind of funny to see you juggling that. And I think you might have another project. Again, it's pretty.
Oh, I do. Yeah, maybe next week maybe I'll do my ML one, right? And then the week after that,
my goodness,
yeah.
There's so many projects. It's crazy. All right.
Actually, Samson, how did you end up implementing the private versus public resources?
Oh, yeah. I can here I can actually just like pull up the GitHub or something. I'm not sure if I think this is like not the worst thing in the world. So I made just new okay, yeah, so the backend is like it's through Amplify, it uses AppSync, so it uses GraphQL, and yeah, I can just show the schema. So originally these were the two items I had, right? Was just a project and an event, which was pretty straightforward, and these are only accessible by the account that created it. But the problem was like how do you turn that into like a public thing, right? And I guess ideally you would go to the same URL, like you would just go to like /project ID, and if you're not logged in, it would be like a public page if it's public, and if you are logged in, it would be the edit page. But I think this works just as well. And what it is yeah, so I guess I couldn't figure out how to like make like the authorization conditional. So I just made two new types that are just public project and public event. And there's just a lot of code. So like I had to like rewrite like the create event and like edit events and stuff to be like, to check like if it's a public event, like also update the public event. But this way it's a lot cleaner, right? So anyone can read these things and all the data is copied over. And the S3 files, on the other hand, their permissions can be changed on an item basis. So it's not duplicating like a ton of data. It's just duplicating like these event things, and they have different IDs and stuff. Yeah, and I don't know, like if there's a better way to do this, like this is like my first GraphQL project or like full stack project at all. So I don't know if there's a better way to do this. And I do know there's some parts of this are like, I feel like there should be a better way of doing it. Like I have some really ugly like query chains, which is I feel like goes against the design of GraphQL, right? Because you should be able to just like do everything in one query. So like this is an example of that, right? Where so what is this doing? This is handling, okay, so this is on event creation even. So if you're creating a public event, it creates it creates a private event, and then and then it's a separate query or a separate mutation to create the public event, and then a mutation after that to link the public event to the private event, which feels really roundabout. And maybe there's a better way to do it. I would definitely want to learn, but I haven't found it yet. And just like, this is a whole thing about like using AWS Amplify is that like so for example, when I like deploy the backend, like that schema file was the only thing I directly wrote. And then it's just like a CLI command, like amplify push. And then it does everything else for you. Like I don't even have to touch the AWS console even, except for like testing and like editing stuff later. So that's definitely like, yeah, after we launch this like first version is to rewrite everything in serverless. Yeah, so that it's not so like directly linked. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I haven't actually used Amplify before, but it sounds like there's a lot of magic going on Amplify side that makes it hard. It can be hard to get the fine-grained to the tuning that you want.
Yeah.
Sweet. Alrighty. Well, thank you, Samson. I'm going to give you a round of applause. I know people already have, but so that we can get that on video, you can hear my hands clapping.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, I think we saw Was it Van? I think I see a couple. One from Van and one from somebody who might be demoing a Hello World one, which I'm always a huge fan of. But so let's go Van and then the Hello World one if you want to next. If you want to. Yeah.
Hello.
Hey Van.
Hey, just gonna be talking from my mobile, but I'll actually be presenting on my computer. Don't have to worry about that.
Right.
All right, share screen. Oh God, I hope this works. Ha! I don't have to leave. Okay. So this is another design iteration for my portfolio. On this one, I kind of focused on making it responsive and have it not crash. So I know it says like front end engineer. No, I'm honestly like a UI designer who does leak code on the side. But I have a portable, well, not portable, but I have a hamburger menu on the side for the mobile, and then I just have soft scroll. Honestly, it's not it's not completely done because if we go all the way down, yeah, boy. But it just, I think it's, hold on, let me test it out. I actually haven't tested it yet. Oh, it's responsive. All right. Hold on, let me see if I can break it actually. Okay, so it's responsive. Unfortunately, didn't break. And I guess the main improvement on here is that my other iteration actually had like 1,600 lines of CSS, so I got that down to like 257. Don't ask me how. I just kind of winged it. It turned out this way. Uh, yeah. It looks really bootstrappy. I'm gonna be honest, but no, I wasn't able to use like any CSS frameworks here because I just kind of wanted to learn how to actually do CSS.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Phil, I tried to use like Flexbox like you did, dude. Oh my God, no! It like broke every time I did it, so I had to use Grid. I don't know how you do that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. There's really nothing to show here.
Dude, no, it's awesome. We've seen you present on your website a few times, and I think the first one might have been just like I don't know if it was like a
It was a
wireframe.
boilerplate, dude.
Yeah,
It was a boilerplate.
wireframe, and so it's really cool to kind of see you like put in some elbow grease and kind of make it your own.
Oh yeah. By the way, I got like a lot of the resources, like this background video from this website, which is like a whole hodgepodge of like just design development stuff for like people who are just like not naturally designers. So I'm gonna link this in like the chat in like Discord for like people to use. So
Sweet.
yeah, that's it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Van. Let's give him a round of applause, guys. Cool. Okay. And do we have any other demos for the day? If anybody else wants a demo, if not, then what we'll do next is our breakout sessions and talk about auth again. But I'm just going to do a quick kind of last call for demos. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll move into the next phase then.